It was Monday, June 3rd, the kind of Florida morning where the heat and humidity team up to make your shirt stick to your back before you've even touched your coffee. I left the house at 7:45 a.m. sharp, like every weekday. Vanessa was already in the kitchen, dressed in tan slacks and a soft blue blouse, sipping from one of those tall skinny tumblers she never washed properly. She didn't look up when I walked in. I said, "You working from home today?" She said, "Yeah. 2 client calls and a tax review for the Carter file." Her voice had that clipped, customer service tone she used when she didn't want to be questioned. I nodded and grabbed my keys from the hook near the pantry. The smell of cologne, sharp, citrusy, unfamiliar, lingered in the hallway. It wasn't mine. I pulled out of our West Chase neighborhood and took Linneball Avenue past the Publix, then headed south on Veterans Expressway. My usual route. Same pothole at the exit ramp. Same digital billboard for personal injury lawyers. Stopped by Perk and Pour, wedged between a UPS store and a dry cleaner. There were already 2 moms outside with strollers and iced coffees, laughing about something on their phones. Inside, the blast of air conditioning was divine. I grabbed my usual, large vanilla cappuccino, no cinnamon, and exchanged nods with the same girl behind the counter who always smiled like she knew I wasn't sleeping well. Back in the car, I opened the glove box and saw my most recent find, a 1977 vinyl pressing of Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, still sealed. Scored it at a record fair in Clearwater. One of the few things that still gave me a little charge. But that morning something was off. A low burning pressure in my lower gut had started before I even left the driveway. By the time I was halfway to downtown Tampa, it had sharpened into something I couldn't ignore. The parking garage under our building on Kennedy Boulevard was nearly full. I squeezed into the same spot I always used, between a dented Camry and a dusty black Tacoma. Our building shared a strip with a Subway, a vape shop, and a nail salon that smelled like acetone and lavender. I badged into the side employee door, nodded at Carl from accounting, and took the elevator to the 10th floor. I made it to my desk at Sunrise Mutual and opened 3 client files before the pain grew unbearable. At 9:14 a.m., I walked into the men's room like it was any other Monday. But what happened in that bathroom hit me like a sledgehammer. A sharp, burning pain, followed by something no man wants to see. I stood there gripping the edge of the sink, breathing heavy, pulse thudding in my ears. Alan, my supervisor, walked in mid-crisis. He said, "You all right, Mark?" I said, "Think I've got an infection. Gonna get it checked." He nodded, didn't ask questions. Just said, "Handle it. Take your time." By 10:03 I was walking into the Urgent Care Plus Center on Dale Mabry, tucked between a liquor store and a vape shop. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and boredom. A nurse in pink scrubs handed me a clipboard without looking up. They ran the usual tests, took samples, drew blood. I waited under a flickering fluorescent light, watching a muted TV rerun of The Price is Right. When the doctor came in, white coat, gray mustache, no small talk, he said, "Mr. Sullivan, your tests are back. You've tested positive for gonorrhea." I blinked. I said, "That's not possible. I've only ever been with my wife." He gave me the look. The same one I'd seen in the mirror just moments before, part disbelief, part anger, part sick realization. He handed me a prescription. Told me to abstain for 7 days after finishing the meds. Then he said, "Your wife should get tested immediately." I nodded. But I didn't say a word. I walked out into the heat. The sun was higher, the sky brighter, but everything looked dim to me. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't send a message. I sat in my car with the AC blasting and thought about the last 15 years. 2 daughters. 1 mortgage. Vacations in Destin. Vanessa's? Work retreats. Her phone always face down. Her sudden fitness obsession at 41. I'd waited until marriage to be with someone. Grew up in a household that taught restraint, discipline, dignity. I carried that with me, maybe for too long. By noon I was back in the office. Alan dropped off a coffee without saying a word. That afternoon, I printed out a child custody form. I didn't even know why yet. But something inside me had already cracked. Quietly. Irreversibly. That night at home, Vanessa reheated frozen enchiladas from Trader Joe's while the girls bickered over what to watch on Disney+. Everything looked normal. That was the scariest part. I sat in silence, chewing, thinking. Watching the family I thought I had. Then I looked across the table and asked myself a question I never thought I'd consider. What if one of them isn't mine? To be continued. The infection was just a symptom. The disease ran deeper, and I was ready to cut it out, piece by piece. Tuesday, 8:02 a.m. The Florida sun was already cruel, pushing 87 degrees Fahrenheit with no breeze in sight. I parked under a withering palm outside Benson and Gray LLP, a small two-story brick office wedged between a real estate agency and a vape shop on Dale Mabry. I killed the engine, grabbed the folder I had prepared the night before, and sat still for a moment, letting the AC blast until it lost the fight against the heat. Inside, it smelled like laminate floors, burnt coffee, and quiet judgment. A young receptionist in a rust-colored blouse looked up from her screen and said, "Mr. Sullivan?" I nodded. She said, "Mr. Gray will see you in 5. He's wrapping up a call." I sat down across from a fake ficus and stared at a watercolor of Clearwater Beach. 15 minutes later, a short man in a beige suit called my name. Mr. Gray didn't waste time. I appreciated that. He said, "What brings you in today?" I said, "I need to understand my position, legally. If I file for divorce." He said, "You suspect cheating?" I said, "I don't suspect. I know. And I tested positive for gonorrhea yesterday." He blinked, then leaned back. He said, "Right. So, let's talk assets. Custody. Financial exposure. Have you done anything yet?" I said, "I froze the joint credit cards. But she still has access to our main savings account." He nodded slowly, typing. He said, "We'll put a temporary hold on shared funds if there's evidence of infidelity or misuse." "You said she works in accounting, right?" I said, "At Hennigan and Lowe. They do tax and compliance work for small businesses." He looked up. He said, "Have you checked whether she opened any secondary accounts? Moved funds into an entity or someone else's name?" I hadn't. But I would. At 10:46 a.m. I was inside a Crescent Bay Credit Union branch, air-conditioned to the point of absurdity. The woman at the desk scanned my ID and pulled up our account. She said, "There's a recent transfer for $8,000 to someone named Linda Whitmore." I said, "That's not a family member." She said, "It's listed as business consulting. Linda Whitmore. She worked with Vanessa. Not a friend, at least not that I knew of. But the name sounded familiar for a reason. I remembered the Christmas party at their office last year. Linda was the one who'd made a joke about keeping secrets in spreadsheets, while tipsy on sangria. That moment, which once meant nothing, now had weight. Everything did. I requested a printout and walked out into the heat. Back in the car, I sat in silence. The file folder on the passenger seat felt heavier than before. My phone buzzed, a message from Vanessa. "Hey, could you grab almond milk on your way home? The girls are low." I didn't respond. I drove across town to the family court building and filed an emergency petition to secure financial assets pending marital review. Clerk asked for ID. I signed 3 documents, paid a $42 fee, and was told to await contact from a court-appointed mediator. Every step felt sterile. Paper over pain. Ink over anger. But it also felt right. That night, after dinner, I sat on the back porch with a cup of decaf and watched the sky turn from gold to bruised blue. Inside, I could hear the hum of the dishwasher and one of the girls laughing at something on TV. Then I heard her voice. The younger one, Ellie, 9 years old. She said, "Mom? What's this folder with all those pictures of Daddy's name?" Vanessa mumbled something too low to catch. I stayed seated, staring at the sky. My daughter had found the file. probably on the kitchen counter. Maybe it was the bank statement. Maybe the printed email. Whatever it was, she shouldn't have seen it. But maybe it was better that she did. The next morning, I made a private appointment at West Bay Diagnostics. A test I never imagined I'd have to take. I thought I was hunting down a betrayal. But part of me already knew. I wasn't just losing a wife. I might be losing a daughter too. Wednesday, 2:11 p.m. West Bay Diagnostics was tucked behind a Publix on Cypress Street. Strip mall architecture, tired palms, sun-bleached parking lines. Inside, it smelled like printer toner and hand sanitizer. The nurse handed me an envelope, plain, unmarked. I thanked her. She said, "You sure you don't want to open it here?" I said, "No. I already know." She said nothing. Just nodded, like she'd heard that before. Back in my truck, I let the AC run full blast while I stared at the envelope. Outside, the air shimmered. 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Light wind. Radio mumbled through weather updates I didn't hear. I opened it. Biological relationship, excluded. That's all it said. Ellie wasn't mine. Not biologically. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe either. I just sat there, hands still on the wheel, engine humming beneath me. It felt like losing a limb I hadn't realized was already gone. I drove. No destination. Just asphalt, exits, heat. Ended up at a Starbucks off Kennedy Boulevard, ordered black coffee, no room. Sat in the corner with a yellow legal pad and wrote 2 columns. Known facts. Unanswered questions. Under. Facts. I wrote. Vanessa had an 8K transfer to Linda Whitmore. Ellie's DNA didn't match mine. Our shared iPad started autolocking last week. Under questions. Who's Ellie's biological father? Was Linda more involved than it seemed? Was anyone else helping her? That night, after dinner, I said, "I'm going to update the iPad. It's been slow." Vanessa nodded. She said, "Sure. Just don't erase my work stuff." I said, "Wouldn't dream of it." In reality, I handed it to Trent, an old college friend turned IT contractor. He owed me 2 favors from a startup I funded years ago. He smiled and said, "I'll pull the deleted caches. Anything that touched Wi-Fi or was screenshotted, I'll find it." I said, "Don't skip personal folders. If it's there, I want it." Thursday, 6:37 p.m. Trent texted me. "Got something. We'll explain in person. You won't like it." He showed up that night with a flash drive and a grim look. He said, "There was a synced account. Her Google Drive." He said, "She kept a spreadsheet of transactions, labeled as bonuses." I said, "For who?" He said, "A guy named Ruben. Same guy in 4 hotel confirmations. All local. All Thursdays." I said, "How far back?" He said, 18 months. Maybe more. She cleaned recent stuff. But the backup stayed. Then he paused. He said, "There's more." The iPad had saved documents from someone else's email. "Guess who?" I said, "Linda." He nodded. "Yeah. Linda. She's not just a co-worker. She's involved in this. Financially." I sat outside that night again, porch light off. Just me, heat, and a small Bluetooth speaker humming Miles Davis. Inside, the girls were quiet. At 9:14 p.m., I heard a shuffle near the screen door. Ellie stepped out, holding a drawing pad. She said, "Dad? Can I ask something?" I said, "Sure." She said, "If someone isn't your real kid, but you raise them, does that still make them your kid?" My chest didn't tighten. My breath didn't catch. I just said, "What do you think?" She looked at me. Big eyes. Quiet. Stronger than she should be. She said, "I think yes." Then walked back inside. I sat there for another hour. No drink. No music. No thoughts. Only one certainty remained. Vanessa had taken my trust, my money, and now my name from my own daughter. The truth had arrived. But this time, it hadn't broken me. It had pointed me straight at them. Monday, 10:18 a.m. Jacob's family law sat inside a repurposed craftsman house on Swan Avenue. The porch creaked, the air reeked of citrus cleaner, and inside, ceiling fans spun lazily under humidity that even central air couldn't kill. The woman behind the desk, mid-40s, gray blazer, firm handshake, introduced herself as Marlene Jacobs. She said, "Custody, asset protection, or both?" I said, "Both. And I'm not here to play nice." She nodded once. No lecture. No hesitation. I laid out the timeline. 15 years married. 2 daughters. 1, biologically not mine. Wife's affair. Financial transfers to a coworker. DNA test. Confirmed. iPad data recovery. Hotel bookings, fake bonuses, and emails linking her to a man named Ruben. Marlene flipped pages as I spoke. She said, "Have you seen this man face to face?" I said, "Not yet. But I have photos. Screenshots. Dates. Cross-reference to her calendar." She leaned back. She said, "You're ahead of most. But you need to act fast." Then she pulled a file from her drawer, with my name on it. I said, "What's that?" She said, "Your wife already filed a temporary motion. Friday afternoon. Cites emotional instability and financial control tactics. She's trying to preempt you." It hit me like gravel in the gut. Vanessa wasn't just cheating. She was preparing her defense before I knew there was a war. I said, "Can she block me from seeing the kids?" She said, "Only if she convinces a judge you're a threat. But that'll be hard, especially with what you've shown me." I said, "Then I want full custody. Or at least primary residential rights." She lies. She manipulates. And she weaponizes people. Marlene nodded again. She said, "Let's bring receipts." We started compiling. Financial activity, filtered through Linda's consulting business. Texts between Vanessa and R. Vague but clearly intimate. The shared iPad's cloud logs. Even a deleted message to a neighbor named Paul Reeves. That one made me pause. Paul had moved 3 blocks away last fall. We used to chat over beer during our work. I hadn't seen him in months. The message read, "Thanks for covering Tuesday. Sorry I dropped that on you." Tuesday. That was the day I was in Orlando for work. The day Vanessa said she was at book club. Paul knew. And said nothing. At home that night, I said nothing during dinner. The girls talked about school. Vanessa scrolled through her phone like nothing was wrong. Then she said, "Ellie's summer camp deposit is due. Did you want to split that?" I looked at her. I said, "Pay it from your consulting account. The one Linda helped you set up." She froze. Only for a second. But I saw it. She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You know exactly what I mean." She got up, grabbed her plate, and walked to the sink. The silence left behind was louder than any argument. Later, I drove to Paul's house. He opened the door in gym shorts, holding a Coors. I said, "You lied for her." He said, "Mark, come on, man. I didn't want to be involved." I said, "You already were. And now I know." He said, "She said you were controlling? That you might snap." I laughed. "Just once." I said, "You think this is me snapping?" He didn't answer. I walked away. That night I printed everything. Organized files, labeled drives, and sent duplicates to Marlene. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. It was war. But I wasn't here to scream. I was here to finish it clean. She filed first. But I brought the kind of evidence you don't scream about. You drop it in court, and let it bleed. Friday. 7:42 a.m. The kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the fridge. Ellie sat across from me, poking at her cereal with the back of her spoon. She didn't say much. I said, "You sleep okay?" She nodded, but not like a child, like someone pretending. Then she asked. She said, "Do moms ever lie about big things?" I said, "Sometimes." She said, "Even to their kids?" I answered, "Especially to their kids." She blinked slow. Then got up, left her bowl half full, and walked back to her room. No tears. No tantrum. Just quiet understanding, and something breaking under the surface. That afternoon I met with Ray Holbrook, a forensic accountant Marlene recommended. Mid-50s, tan suit, carried a tablet and a calm expression like nothing surprised him anymore. He said, "I've reviewed your materials. There's more here than just infidelity. You've got fraud." I said, "Can we tie it to someone besides her?" He said, "Already did." He turned the tablet toward me. A shell corporation. Florida registered. Operated under Whitmore Consulting LLC, Linda's name, but guess who filed the paperwork? Reuben? No. Gregory T. Shaw. Real estate broker. Lives in St. Petersburg. And Vanessa's ex-colleague from her old job. Before she changed careers. I said, "Is he Ellie's father?" Ray said, "That's not in my wheelhouse. But I pulled court records. He paid off a speeding ticket the same week Vanessa gave birth. From a hospital only 10 minutes from his office." I stared at the photo. Older guy. Sharp jaw. Wore a Rolex like he wanted it noticed. I didn't recognize him. But I knew enough. I said, "Can you prove he's still in contact?" Ray said, "Already did. Venmo transfers. Labeled as old tuition stuff and shared storage." That night, I sat on the back deck with a printout of the transfer history. Vanessa came out barefoot, holding a glass of wine. She said, "Are you still digging?" I didn't answer. She said, "You think hurting me will fix this?" I said, "No. But exposing you might stop others from being hurt by you." She rolled her eyes. She said, "You're not some hero, Mark. You just can't let go." I said, "Neither could you. That's why there are still payments going to Greg Shaw." She froze. For once, I saw fear, not anger, not pride, but something close to panic. The next morning, Marlene filed our motion. Full custody of both girls. Motion to freeze assets pending fraud review. Notice to subpoena Gregory T. Shaw for financial testimony. Vanessa found out an hour later, through her lawyer, not me. She stormed into my office at home. She said, "You brought him into this?" I said, "No. You did. Years ago." She said, "You're going to ruin everything." I said, "No, Vanessa. I'm going to rebuild. You already ruined it." She stood there, jaw clenched, wine-stained breath, trembling hands. Then she left. No slamming doors. Just a quiet, hard retreat. That night, Ellie came into my office. She said, "Is Mr. Shaw the guy from that photo Mom keeps on her old phone?" I didn't flinch. I said, "Maybe." "Why?" She said, "He came to my dance recital once. Mom said he was a friend. But I saw her cry after he left." Then she walked out. And I sat there, with a war chest of evidence, a daughter too smart for her own good, and a storm rolling in. The man she tried to erase wasn't Reuben. It was someone older, hidden better, and far more dangerous to her story. Now I had a name. And soon a courtroom. Tuesday. 1:27 p.m. The courthouse in downtown Tampa looked more like a tired bank than a hall of justice. Beige walls. Flickering fluorescent lights. The kind of place where truth didn't scream, it whispered on paper. Marlene adjusted her glasses. She said, "Stay quiet. Let them talk themselves into a corner." I nodded. I wasn't here to win sympathy. I was here to win control. Vanessa sat 2 tables down, flanked by her lawyer, young, sharp suit, but nervous fingers. She didn't look at me. Not once. Judge Atkins entered. Calm. Mid-60s. Voice like gravel smoothed over bourbon. The hearing was for temporary orders, custody, assets, access. Vanessa's lawyer began. He said, Your Honor, my client is concerned for the emotional well-being of her daughters. She's been subjected to controlling behavior, surveillance, financial intimidation. Marlene raised a hand. She said, Your Honor, may I submit Exhibits A through K? He said, Proceed. Folders slid across the desk. Inside, GPS logs from the SUV Vanessa used, cross-referenced with private hotel receipts. Bank statements showing funneling of joint funds into Whitmore Consulting. Messages between Vanessa and both Reuben and Greg Shaw. The courtroom stayed silent. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Then Reuben was called. He walked in wearing a blazer too tight for his build and a forced calm that cracked at the edges. He said, We were friends. Just friends. Marlene said, Did you ever stay at a hotel with her? He paused. He said, Only once. For a conference. Marlene said, Was her husband there? He said, No. Marlene, did you share a room? He said, No comment. The judge raised an eyebrow. After Reuben, the room shifted. Vanessa's lawyer whispered furiously in her ear. Then she stood up, without invitation, and said, She said, This is all twisted. He's trying to destroy me because he can't handle the truth. The judge cut in. He said, Mrs. Davis, sit down. Let your attorney speak for you. She did, but with shaking hands and red eyes. For the first time, she looked at me. And saw someone she couldn't manipulate anymore. After the break, Greg Shaw's name came up. Marlene said, He failed to appear despite subpoena. We request a bench order. Judge said, Granted. We'll schedule for next week. But the damage was done. Greg's payments. His connection to Ellie's birth. His financial trail. All in evidence now. Outside, the sun hit like a furnace. I walked toward the parking garage when I heard small footsteps behind me. Ellie. She said, Was that court? I said, Yes. She said, Mom looked scared. I nodded. She said, Is Mr. Shaw in trouble? I answered, He might be. Then she asked. She said, Are you still my real dad? I stopped. Turned. I said, That's not something biology decides. She looked down. Then she said, Okay, Dad. Just that. And walked beside me to the car. She cracked in front of the judge, not because I shouted. Because I never had to say a word. The truth was already louder than her voice. Friday, 10:03 a.m. The ruling came through email. No drama. No gavel slam. Just a PDF. I opened it, read the words, then leaned back in my chair. Primary custody, granted. Asset control, frozen pending investigation. Visitation, supervised only. Spousal support, denied. Vanessa's lawyer had gone quiet since last hearing. Marlene said, They're probably negotiating a way to exit quietly. I said, Let them. I'm not chasing them into the dirt. 3 days later, Greg Shaw appeared. Not in court, in my inbox. An email. He wrote, I didn't know she lied to you about Ellie. I figured you always knew. She said it was sordid. I never tried to take your place. I didn't respond. Then he sent another. I'll testify if needed. But I won't fight for her. I've got my own daughter. I wouldn't want her growing up around that kind of deception. Funny thing, the man I thought I'd hate? He had more dignity than she did. Vanessa moved out of her mother's house. Apparently, even Linda drew a line when the money stopped. She filed an appeal. It was rejected. Twice. I saw her one last time, outside the elementary school. She was waiting by the fence, trying not to look like she was waiting. I stayed in the car. Watched Ellie walk past her without slowing down. Vanessa said something. Ellie didn't answer. Didn't even glance back. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just drove. Now, every Sunday, Ellie and I walk to the flea market. We browse vinyl records. She says they smell like old ghosts. I tell her that's just dust and nostalgia. She laughs. Not like her mother. Not guarded. This morning, I brewed a new bag of Guatemala roast, rich, deep, with that little bitter finish I like. Ellie made waffles. Radio played Springsteen. Light through the blinds. No tension. No silence filled with unsaid things. Just peace. She looked up from her plate. She said, "You're not gonna date again, right?" I said, "Not for a while." She said, "Good." We both laughed. Then she said, "You're not like other dads." I said, "You're not like other kids." That was enough. Subscribe if you want more stories about real men who don't scream. They act. Coldly? To the end? Speech balloon. What city are you watching Cheating Tales real stories from?